The room is already warm when it happens. Not loud, not rowdy, just thick. Culver City, 1937. Inside a private ballroom off the MGM lot after midnight. The sales convention has technically ended, but no one has gone home. The orchestra has stopped playing. Glasses sit half-drunk on linen-covered tables. Cigarette smoke hangs low, caught in the chandeliers like something unwilling to leave. Patricia Douglas is standing near the edge of the room, close enough to be visible, far enough to be ignored. That's when her name is said. Not announced. Not shouted. Quietly. It doesn't come from the stage, it doesn't come from the crowd. It's spoken from somewhere behind her shoulder, low and conversational, the way a man says something when he expects to be obeyed without discussion. Patricia. Just that. The laughter that had been rolling through the room a second earlier doesn't stop all at once. It fades unevenly. A ripple, not a cut. Chairs scrape softly. Someone clears his throat. A man near the bar glances sideways, then looks down at his drink. No one looks at her directly. That's the first thing she notices. This had been a joke a minute ago. A party story. A private amusement among men who believed the night belonged to them. Now it doesn't feel like that anymore. She turns slightly, just enough to see where the voice came from. A cluster of men stands together, relaxed, confident, coats still on despite the heat. No raised voices, no anger on their faces. One of them smiles, slow and polite, like he's trying not to embarrass her. The smile doesn't reach his eyes. The silence settles. It's not a dramatic silence. No one hushes the room, no one demands attention, the orchestra doesn't stop because it already has. This is a silence created by agreement, by instinct, by years of practice. Patricia feels it before she understands it. This is not about what just happened. This is about what's about to be decided. Earlier that night she had been part of the entertainment, one of several young dancers hired to boost morale at MGM's annual sales convention. This was supposed to be light, controlled, harmless. No contracts. No headlines. Just an understanding that some people existed to make powerful men feel comfortable. At first the laughter had felt normal, easy, a room of executives unwinding. Someone had told a story about a roadshow gone wrong. Someone else had made a remark that landed hard enough to get a reaction. She had smiled when she was supposed to, laughed when the others laughed. Then the tone shifted. It wasn't one comment, it never is. It was a pause. A glance exchanged between men who didn't need to speak out loud. A joke repeated, slightly differently, to see who would object. No one did. Now her name hangs in the air, spoken softly, as if they're inviting her into a conversation she doesn't realize she's already lost. She feels suddenly exposed, not physically, socially, as if the walls have leaned inward without moving, as if the room has decided she is the subject, not a participant. Someone nearby touches her elbow lightly, not to comfort her, to guide her. The pressure is gentle, practiced, the kind meant to leave no mark. She notices that the exits are still open. No one is blocking her way, no one has raised a hand. That's when it becomes frightening. Because it would be easier if they had. A man speaks again, calm, almost friendly. He isn't introduced. He doesn't need to be. The people around him already know who he represents. Let's talk for a moment, he says, just to clear something up. Clear. Not accuse. Not threaten. Clear. The word is chosen carefully. She looks around for support without turning her head too much. Other dancers, staff, anyone. What she sees instead is distance, not hostility, not sympathy, distance. No one wants to be close to what's happening. Because closeness implies involvement. And involvement has consequences. The men around the speaker don't move, but they subtly form a shape. A loose semicircle, not trapping her, just defining where the conversation is supposed to happen. The room has given its permission. Patricia feels her heartbeat in her throat. She tries to remember what exactly she said earlier, what exactly she did, whether she misheard something, whether this is a misunderstanding that can still be laughed away. But the room isn't laughing anymore. And no one rushes to rescue the moment. In Hollywood, silence is not absence. It's instruction. She steps forward because standing still suddenly feels worse. As she does, she realizes something else has changed. The men who were drinking now hold their glasses lower. Conversations nearby have thinned out, not stopped but softened, blurred into background noise meant to give privacy. Privacy for what? For words that won't be written down. For decisions that won't be acknowledged. For consequences that won't arrive all at once. The man closest to her tilts his head slightly, as if considering how much to say in front of witnesses. "We've had a concern raised," he says, "nothing serious, but it needs to be handled properly." Handled. Not investigated. Not discussed. Handled. The word carries weight, professional weight, corporate weight. Patricia realizes then that this is not a conversation about behavior. It's a conversation about liability. The laughter from earlier now feels dangerous in hindsight. The jokes weren't jokes, they were tests, small permissions granted and observed. When nothing stopped them, the room adjusted its understanding of what would be tolerated. And now the adjustment was complete. She notices that no one writes anything down, no one calls for a supervisor, no one asks for her version yet. Because that comes later. After the tone is set. A man at the edge of the group glances at his watch, not impatient, calculating. Time matters but not urgently, this is routine to them. Another man nods once, barely perceptible. An agreement has been reached without being spoken aloud. Patricia feels suddenly very young. Not because she lacks intelligence. Because she lacks power. And everyone here knows the difference. The air feels heavier. She inhales and realizes she's been holding her breath. Her mouth is dry. She notices absurd details, the seam in the carpet, the reflection of chandelier light in a polished shoe, because her mind is searching for something stable. The man in front of her lowers his voice further. "What we're going to do," he says, "is make sure this doesn't turn into something it shouldn't." Shouldn't. The implication sits between them. Something she says next could define her. Something she doesn't say could do the same. The room waits. Not for truth. For compliance. This is the moment where Hollywood doesn't need threats. It doesn't need raised voices or closed doors. All it needs is consensus. And consensus has already been achieved. Patricia understands with a quiet clarity that frightens her more than panic ever could, that the party is over in a way it hadn't been 5 minutes ago. Because now she is no longer an entertainer. She is a risk. And risks don't get laughed at. They get managed. They move her out of the room without ever saying the word leave. Not escorted. Not forced. Guided. The hallway is narrower than she expects, carpeted, quiet. The sound of the ballroom fades behind a closed door that someone gently pulls shut, as if protecting the party from contamination. No one follows too closely, that would look improper. Instead, 2 men walk ahead of her, one behind. The spacing is deliberate, no one touches her now. This is what order looks like when it doesn't need to raise its voice. They stop near a small sitting area just off the main corridor. A table, 3 chairs, a lamp already lit, casting a warm glow meant to feel reassuring. Someone planned this, or at least anticipated the need for it. One of the men gestures to a chair. "Sit, please." Still polite, still calm. She sits. Only now does anyone ask how she's feeling. It's not concern, it's calibration, measuring how much resistance they're dealing with. Patricia answers carefully. She has learned, like many people in rooms she doesn't control, that tone matters more than words. "I don't understand why I'm here," she says. There is a pause, not because they're searching for an answer, because they're deciding which answer will cost them the least. One of the men exhales slowly and folds his hands. "There were some impressions tonight," he says, "some misunderstandings." Misunderstandings imply mutual responsibility. Impressions imply subjectivity. Both dissolve blame before it ever forms. They don't accuse her of anything specific. They don't need to, they simply describe how events look to the wrong people. Her name has already traveled, quietly, efficiently. She realizes then that she isn't speaking to party attendees. She's speaking to intermediaries, people whose job is to prevent situations from becoming stories. One of the men mentions the studio, not directly. He says the organization. Another says the front office. as if referring to weather patterns rather than human beings. Eventually, a name enters the conversation. Eddie Mannix. It isn't spoken with drama, it's spoken the way one mentions a legal precedent or a standing policy. Mannix isn't here, they explain, he doesn't need to be. He's been informed, one of them says. Informed. Not consulted. Not alerted. Informed. Which means decisions are already forming elsewhere. They ask her to recount the evening. She does, carefully, leaving out details that feel dangerous, including ones that feel harmless, trying to find the version of events that might satisfy everyone. No one interrupts, that alone should worry her. When she finishes, one of the men nods slowly, as if impressed by her composure. Of course, he says, there are different perspectives. There always are. He leans back slightly, the chair creaks, a sound too loud for the room. The concern, he continues, is how something like this might be perceived if it were framed improperly. Framed. Now the word changes. Not what happened. How it might look. They aren't asking whether she was harmed, they're asking whether the idea of harm could spread. Hollywood is very good at controlling light, it understands angles, shadows, what the audience sees. What it fears most isn't wrongdoing. It's narrative. They explain gently that she is young, that misunderstandings happen, that careers can be fragile when stories spin out of control, that there are powerful people involved who would prefer this be resolved quietly. Quietly. The word lands heavier now than it did in the ballroom. They are offering her a lifeline, that's how it's presented. All she has to do is agree that nothing out of the ordinary occurred, that she's grateful for the opportunity she was given, that any discomfort was accidental, unintentional, blown out of proportion. She asks finally whether she needs a lawyer. The room cools. Not abruptly. Subtly. They exchange a glance. One of them smiles not unkindly, but something in his eyes closes. Legal involvement would complicate things unnecessarily, he says, and it wouldn't be in your best interest. This is the first sentence that feels like a warning. They explain that MGM is generous with people who cooperate, recommendations, future work, introductions to casting offices that matter. They do not explain what happens to people who don't. They don't have to. She thinks of how the dancers were hired, how names circulate on pieces of paper in conversations, in quiet judgments passed from office to office. No blacklist needs to be written if everyone understands it exists. They let her sit with that understanding. Then one of the men says something that doesn't sound threatening at all. Of course, he says, if this became public we would have to respond. Respond. The word implies force without describing it. We would protect the studio, he continues, and ourselves. And you are not included in that we. She realizes that this is no longer about her experience, it is about which version of events survives. And the studio owns the louder voice. She asks what they want her to do. That seems to please them. Not relief, approval. They don't hand her a document tonight, that would be too abrupt. They explain there will be statements later, affidavits, clarifications, all routine, all designed to help everyone move on. Move on. Another loaded phrase. Before they dismiss her, one of them lowers his voice again, almost kindly. You don't want to be remembered for this, he says, you want to be remembered for your work. He stands, signaling that the meeting is over. As she rises, she realizes she's shaking, slightly, enough to notice, not enough for them to comment on. They escort her back toward the lobby but not through the ballroom. The party is still happening, insulated from consequence. She exits into the cool night air of Culver City feeling strangely unreal, as if she stepped out of one life and into another without walking anywhere. Over the next days, the phone rings less than it used to. Not immediately, gradually. A casting call postponed, a callback that never comes, conversations that stop mid-sentence when her name is mentioned. Then come the papers. Statements prepared by men who weren't there, language shaped to sound reasonable, unimpeachable, she is asked to sign. When she hesitates, the tone shifts again. Not cruel. Not angry. Impatient. She begins to understand that silence is no longer just something happening around her. It is being engineered. And if she doesn't accept their version of it, they will make sure she disappears inside it. What she doesn't know yet is how far that silence is willing to travel. Or how difficult it will be to speak once it settles. By the time Patricia Douglas realizes the door is truly closed, it's because nothing dramatic happens at all. No headline. No confrontation. No sudden fall. Just the slow, administrative withdrawal of oxygen. Weeks pass, then months. Each day looks ordinary enough from the outside. The streetcars still run, the studios still release pictures, new dancers fill the same rooms she once stood in. The machinery continues flawlessly. And yet her name stops opening doors. When she finally understands that the statements she was asked to sign were never meant to protect her, it's already too late to renegotiate. They were written to finish something, to lock the story into a shape that could survive scrutiny while erasing dissent. She tries to talk to people she trusted, some don't answer, others tell her quietly that they can't be involved, not because they doubt her, because doubt is irrelevant. Fear does not require disbelief. What frightens her most is not the loss of work, it's the realization that the room she stood in that night has multiplied. That same silence, the same exchanged glances, now echo in offices she's never entered. She decides, against the advice embedded in every closed door, to push back. That decision changes the texture of everything. When she files formal complaints, she is no longer viewed as a risk to be managed quietly. She becomes something else. A liability. And liabilities provoke defense. The response is swift, calm, and devastatingly thorough. Lawyers appear who speak softly and precisely. Investigators ask her to repeat herself until memory begins to fray. Men who were not present confidently testify about what could not have happened. The studio's version of events hardens. At the center of it all stands the reputation of Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer, a company too large, too profitable, too culturally essential to be shaken by one dancer's account. She realizes, in moments she never expected to have, that truth is not the most powerful thing in the room. Consistency is. Every contradiction is framed as confusion, every emotional reaction as instability. Her composure is dissected for weakness, her past examined not for relevance but for leverage. The room has shifted again. Now, instead of polite guidance, she faces polite endurance. They will let her speak, as long as it doesn't matter. The case moves forward anyway, because giving up would mean accepting the version of herself they've written. In the courtroom, the air feels different than the ballroom did, less theatrical, more clinical, and yet the same dynamics are present, the same caution, the same invisible lines no one crosses. She watches men testify with certainty about her intentions, about her behavior, about what kind of person she must be. She listens as her credibility is handled like a technical problem. At one point, someone describes her as confused. At another, as mistaken. At no point is she described as dangerous. And somehow that makes it worse. Because danger would imply power. When the verdict arrives, it does not declare her a liar. It simply finds that nothing actionable occurred. Legally neat, morally empty. The system exhales. Inside the studio walls, the outcome is understood immediately. Phones ring again, but not for her. Careers resume their arcs. The party never officially ended. It simply learned how to insulate itself better. And Patricia Douglas returns to a world that has absorbed her story without acknowledging it. Years pass. People stop asking her about Hollywood. When they do, they phrase it carefully, as if she's someone who left by choice, as if nothing truly happened. She watches from afar as the industry evolves in name but not in instinct, sees how silence remains a currency, how jokes still test boundaries, how laughter still disguises warnings. What haunts her is not the memory of the night itself, it is how cleanly it vanished from public conversation, how efficiently it was neutralized. Not buried. Rendered unthreatening. There are no statues for moments like that. No documentaries, no neat moral conclusions, just a quiet understanding passed along to the next generation. Some rooms decide who you are before you speak. Late in life, when she talks about it at all, she doesn't speak with bitterness. She speaks with precision. she understands now that the danger was never in a single action. It was in the unanimity. The way a room full of powerful people can recognize a threat without saying so. The way silence can be weaponized without ever being acknowledged as violence. The way a name, spoken quietly, can mark a turning point that never officially existed. Because what happened to Patricia Douglas did not end when the verdict was read. It ended when everyone else learned what the cost of speaking would be. And that lesson, unlike the case, was never forgotten. The room is still warm, still softly lit, still waiting for the next name to be said quietly.